Neymar is the reason the Paradina no longer exists, though he'd be the last person to take credit for it. The hesitation penalty, where a player charges at the ball and then stops completely before the goalkeeper has committed, had been in use across South American football for decades. Pelé did it. Romario did it. Countless Brazilian players used it as a standard weapon from the spot. But those players used it selectively. Neymar used it habitually, methodically, in every competition, on every big stage, until it stopped being a clever trick and became an ongoing argument about whether the penalty shootout was a legitimate contest. FIFA drew the line on the 1st of June, 2010. Any deliberate hesitation during a penalty run-up was now punishable by a yellow card. The rule was new. The debate about who really forced FIFA's hand, and whether Neymar was the cause or just the final straw, is still alive in football comment sections everywhere. What makes that debate interesting is what it reveals about how football actually changes. Rules don't get written because governing bodies anticipate problems. They get written when a player pushes something to the point where ignoring it becomes impossible. Every major rule change in football history has the same basic shape. A player finds something that works, keeps using it until it is undeniable, and forces a response. Roberto Carlos never set out to rewrite the laws of physics. He just hit free kicks the way he hit free kicks, generating so much pace and spin that the ball curved around walls, dipped at angles that made no intuitive sense, and left goalkeepers staring at the back of their net, wondering what had just happened. His free kick against France in 1997 is the most famous example, bending around the entire wall and swinging back in, from what looked like the wrong direction entirely. What Carlos made visible was a structural problem that had existed for decades. Defensive walls couldn't be controlled. Players would edge forward, drift sideways, and completely break formation, trying to cut off angles. And referees had no reliable way to enforce the 10-yard distance rule. By 2009, FIFA had formalized the rule and introduced vanishing spray to mark the line. Whether it was specifically Carlos's genius that caused this, or whether he simply made a chronic problem acute enough to address, is debatable. That his free kick ability accelerated the change is hard to argue with. Pelé changed football in ways that went beyond what even he experienced on the pitch. At the 1962 World Cup in Chile, he suffered a serious muscle injury during the group stage and couldn't play another match. At the 1966 World Cup in England, he was fouled badly enough against Bulgaria to leave the field entirely, with Brazil playing the rest of the match 10 men short both times. The rules gave him no protection. If your star player got hurt mid-match, you either played through it or competed with fewer players. There were no substitutions. That changed at the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, where teams were permitted to replace injured or tired players for the first time. But 1970 brought a second rule change that often gets separated from the first in how it is told: yellow and red cards. Cards weren't introduced purely as a communication tool between referees and players, though that was part of it. They were introduced partly because players like Pelé had spent years being systematically fouled and targeted by defenders who faced no formal sanction. The 1970 tournament was football collectively deciding that both physical casualties and deliberate violence needed addressing at the same time. Leigh Richmond Roose, a Welsh goalkeeper who played in the early 1900s, discovered a loophole that nobody had thought to close, simply because nobody had thought to exploit it. At the time, goalkeepers were permitted to use their hands anywhere on the pitch, not just inside the penalty area. Roose used this in the most literal way possible. He would catch the ball in his box, then walk it upfield, holding it with his hands, while defenders tried to figure out what to do about a goalkeeper who was now functioning as an extra attacker with special privileges. He wasn't cheating, he was operating completely within the written rules. In 1912, the International FA restricted goalkeeper handling to the penalty area, creating one of the most fundamental boundaries in the game. Roose had essentially played himself into the rulebook. Around the same era, an Argentine goalkeeper named Américo Tesoriere was doing something equally systematic on the penalty spot. Before 1929, there were no restrictions on what a goalkeeper could do while a penalty was being taken. Tesoriere exploited this completely, stepping forward off his line, pacing along it sideways, making direct eye contact with the shooter, doing anything to disrupt concentration. Before the ball was struck, penalty conversion rates declined wherever his tactics spread. The IFAB's 1929 response, requiring goalkeepers to keep both feet on the line until the ball was kicked, was essentially a rule written in response to one goalkeeper's psychological creativity. It is worth noting that the same tradition has never fully disappeared. Emi Martinez's mind games during the 2022 World Cup shootout and the rule changes that followed are the current chapter. In a story that Tesoriere started over 100 years ago, Diego Forlan's shirtless celebration at Manchester United in 2003-04 sounds like a minor footnote when you describe it on paper. He scored, took his shirt off, celebrated, and then play restarted with Forlan still topless and actively chasing the ball around the pitch. No one had written a rule against it because no one had imagined it would happen. But the rule that followed wasn't really about Forlan's moment specifically. Players had been using undershirts as a platform for political messages, religious symbols, and statements in support of political candidates. A marketing director named Jerome Valk formally raised the concern. If players could show anything they wanted on an undershirt, what was stopping every goal celebration from becoming an unauthorized advertisement? By late 2004, the rule was in place. Remove your shirt to celebrate, and you're collecting a yellow card. It was a commercial firewall, dressed up as a sporting regulation. Peter Schmeichel's influence on the back pass rule is real, but the full story is bigger than one goalkeeper. The rule preventing goalkeepers from picking up deliberate passes from their own teammates was approved before Euro 1992, primarily in response to what had happened at the 1990 World Cup in Italy, a tournament where time-wasting in defensive football had become so pronounced. Matches were almost unwatchable for long stretches. Schmeichel's tactical brilliance during Denmark's run to the Euro 1992 title, absorbing pass after pass, collecting the ball in his hands, slowing everything to a crawl while opponents watched helplessly, made the rule feel necessary in real time. But it had already been decided. He was the poster case for a rule whose moment had already come. The 6-second possession limit that followed in 1997 is the rule that Schmeichel and his successors did more directly inspire. Once the back pass route was closed, keepers adapted. Hold the ball in two hands. Walk to one side of the box. Walk back. Think about it. Think some more. Gianluigi Buffon developed this into something more refined. Faking the release. Pulling back mid-motion. Walking to a different spot. Then beginning the whole process again. It was less time-wasting, in the crude sense, and more a form of tactical control over the pace of the match. FIFA tightened the 6-second rules enforcement, and in 2011 clarified that once a release motion begins, it must be completed. Each iteration of the rule was a response to an iteration of the tactic. Zinedine Zidane's headbutt on Marco Materazzi in the 2006 World Cup final was career-ending in the most dramatic circumstances imaginable. What it also did was prove, live and in front of approximately 700 million viewers, that 3 match officials could not see everything that happened on a full-size football pitch. The 4th official, who happened to be monitoring a sideline screen, was the only person in the stadium who caught it. Zidane was sent off. FIFA expanded the 4th official's role and his access to external camera coverage after that tournament. The logic that produced VAR, formally introduced at the 2018 World Cup, traces directly back to what was exposed on that night in Berlin. Frank Lampard, goal that wasn't given in the 2010 World Cup, is the moment that closed the argument. His shot struck the crossbar and bounced down clearly over the goal line before spinning back out. The referee waved play on England, who should have leveled at 2-2, lost 4-1, and went home. Anyone who watched it live could see what had happened. FIFA, which had been declining to implement goal line technology for years, on the basis that it would interfere with the natural flow of the game, found themselves with no credible objection left. Goal line technology was introduced at the 2014 World Cup. The sport was better for it. The reason it happened, more than anything else, was a single shot. That bounced the wrong way, at the wrong moment in 2010. None of these players were trying to rewrite football. They were trying to win matches, stop goals, or score them. The rules changed because they were good enough at what they did to make gaps in the rulebook undeniable. That is how football actually evolves, not by design, but by someone being too good at something for the sport to pretend the gap doesn't exist.